This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cú Chulainn, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Gráinne Wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and ghosts who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore or mythology. We retell it, have a chat about the tale itself, and about the craft, the culture, and the history of storytelling. My name is Kevin Ciola, and I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 243 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we have one of the most famous fairy tales of all time. This is the story of the Little Mermaid. But first, a very big welcome to any new and returning listeners. If this is your first episode, you're very, very welcome. And if you're a returning listener, as always, thank you so much for your support. There are several ways you can continue to support this podcast. You can follow me over on Instagram at Fireside Bard. Share this on your stories, tell your friends about it. Always the best way still to grow the podcast. You can join Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcastnetwork.com, where for as little as €5 a month, you can gain access to bonus material, not just for Fireside, but for all of the podcasts on the episode on the Headstuff Podcast Network. We have our new members-only exclusive episode on Hadestown, and we will be having more episodes coming up, including on the Cartoon Saloon series of folklore-inspired movies, The Secret of Kells, Song of the Sea, and Wolfwalkers. And there's lots more ideas coming up in the immediate future as we build up this new solo, separate subscriber-only series. But that is if you want to subscribe to Headstuff Plus. And the final way is you can buy my book, Garden Sea, a Neomyth of Home, my poetry collection, available in paperback from the Headstuff website and in Kindle version instantly on Amazon. And we can ship the paperback all over the world. So thank you to those who have already bought that and continue to buy that book. That is my personal favourite way of you supporting the podcast. But those are all the cells out of the way, and that is that. All the links are in the description below. The story for this week, it doesn't really need a huge amount of introduction, and it actually is quite a meaty, beefy story. It was one of the longer stories to adapt. But the first thing that's notable about this story is that while it is a fairy tale, it is not folklore. It is an original story by the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen. Hans Christian Andersen was one of the great writers of the 19th century, for a time a friend of Charles Dickens, and a creator of operas and plays and novels, and really worked across so many mediums, but he is most celebrated today for his fairy tales, including this, The Little Mermaid, The Snow Queen, The Red Shoes, The Little Matchstick Girl, The Emperor's New Clothes. Andersen is one of those writers that has written stories that have become so ubiquitous and so much a part of pop culture that I think you'd forget or not realise the level of work and influence that he still holds today. And there is no better case of that than The Little Mermaid, which is commemorated today in a statue that is in Denmark. So this in many ways is the symbol of Andersen himself. And of course is most widely known today for its adaptation by Walt Disney, which we will talk about a bit afterwards as well, because you'll find if you're only familiar with The Little Mermaid from the Disney film, you will notice a lot of similarities. In a lot of ways it stays quite close, and then it veers off in quite drastic ways, and some subtle changes have larger impacts. I certainly was taken by both things that you would think were exclusive to the Disney film that actually do exist in the story, and then very different, not only tonal shifts, but intentions and characters that may make small decisions that have a massive impact on the story overall. So we will chat more afterwards, but this is the tale of the Little Mermaid on Fireside. The Little Mermaid. Deep in the dark of the great North Sea, there ruled a king, the Sea King. With the body of a man and the tail of a fish, he held command and respect of all oceans. But nothing was so beloved to the Sea King as his 6 beautiful daughters. But the tides and waves are a heavy charge, and so the Sea King's daughters were primarily in the care of the king's mother. The grandmother taught all the mermaid princesses the rules of the ocean and the dangers of the world above. Each of the daughters had confidence, talent, and beauty, and each were born a year apart. But the youngest princess was different. She was beautiful for sure, but she was quiet, and most of all, curious. It was a rite of passage in the seas that when a mermaid turns 15, she is allowed to swim up to the surface and see the world of the humans. 5 of the 6 daughters had already experienced this tradition, and none were too interested in sailing or beaches or birds, and certainly not humans. But the Little Mermaid, who was still only 14, ached and longed to see the sky. This had all begun on the day she had discovered a statue of a human boy that she became obsessed with. She wondered if all humans were so perfect, if they all wore these things she learned were called clothes, and she soon learned that they were not all made of stone. From this point on, the Little Mermaid constantly asked her sisters of the world above. They told her of ships and castles, and more basic elements like the sun and air. There is a ball of fire in the sky, but only during the daytime, and it warms the humans. And instead of currents, they have a thing called wind, which makes their boats move. And tell me about the humans, the Little Mermaid pleaded. Humans are strange. They have an obsession with the sea. They want to explore all of it and put flags everywhere. They fight with each other constantly, and not for food or survival. We don't know why, but we think it has something to do with the flags. The Little Mermaid was confused, but fascinated, and had never looked forward to any birthday more than her 15th. The day arrived, and the Little Mermaid swam up to the surface and breathed air for the very first time. She saw the sun, felt the wind, and marveled at the unpredictability of the waves. She couldn't believe how the water she lived in every day looked this way from above. The mermaid was scared, but exhilarated by the experience, and she nearly burst with excitement once she saw a colossal structure of wood and fabric hurtling on top of the waves. It was the size of a whale, and she recognized from her sister's description that this was a ship. And where there was a ship, there were always humans. The Little Mermaid swam towards the ship until she was close enough to see the legs of people. There seemed to be a celebration of some kind happening. The people were moving their bodies in such a strange way, and all the attention seemed to be on one young boy who looked around the same age as the mermaid. The sea girl loved the look of all the humans, but none so more than this handsome youth. He reminded her of the statue that had begun her obsession, and she heard the humans refer to the youth as a prince. So he was royalty too, just like her, or so the Little Mermaid thought. But the Little Mermaid's intrigue was interrupted by water that began falling from the sky. She wondered, was this how tides worked? The water fell more and more as dark shapes filled the air, then flashes of light, followed by deep rumbles all around. The waves became even more tempestuous. The Little Mermaid realized this was a storm. The ship began to rock side to side, and the humans began to scream. The mermaid was helpless as the ship capsized and began to sink. The Little Mermaid burst forward, swimming through wood and fire until she found the prince. He was unconscious, so the mermaid carried him all the way to shore. This was a long distance, and the mermaid was little, but she was determined to save the youth. When they finally reached the beach, the Little Mermaid didn't know if the prince was alive or dead. Before she could find out, she heard the sound of other female humans. The Little Mermaid knew that one of the golden rules of her visit was not to be spotted by humans. So she dove back into the sea and swam to a nearby rock. There she watched these girls gather around the prince, who, to the mermaid's delight, woke up without ever seeing his rescuer. The Little Mermaid returned home to the kingdom of the Sea King as a princess possessed. The surface, the sky, and the prince completely consumed her mind. She asked her sisters more and more questions, and their half-answers or total obliviousness frustrated her. So the Little Mermaid went to the wisest person she knew, her grandmother. The princess had really one burning question more than any other. "Grandmother, do humans live as long as mermaids?" The grandmother was surprised by the specificity and astuteness of this question. "That's a complex question to answer, my child. Yes and no. Child, while we mermaids live for often over 300 years, the life of a mortal human is far shorter. Depending on war and disease, a human may live into their 80s. But where the trade-off happens is that humans have an immortal soul." "A soul? What's that, grandmother?" asked the Little Mermaid. "A soul, my dear, is an invisible part of a human that lives for all eternity. So while most of a human dies young, a part of them lives forever." "And mermaids?" "When mermaids die, we turn to sea foam. We return to the sea that birthed us. But we don't have souls in the sense that humans do." "Is it possible for a mermaid to obtain a soul?" asked the Little Mermaid. This question horrified her grandmother. "A mermaid gain a soul? Child, that is against the laws of nature. She would have to completely abandon everything that makes us who we are. Think no more on this, child. We have our world, and the humans have theirs." The grandmother would answer no more of the Little Mermaid's questions, but the girl became consumed by the desire for an immortal soul. A soul. It sounded like magic. And there was only one person under the sea who knew about magic. And that was the Sea Witch. The Sea Witch lived in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean. She was said to be older than even the king's grandmother. She was no mermaid. She was something more ancient still. The Little Mermaid had never met her, nor even confirmed that she existed. But she knew where to find her. The mermaid swam down a trench surrounded by long tentacles of seaweed. The water became colder and colder as the light grew dimmer, eventually being replaced by bioluminescent algae. There, at the bottom of the ocean, the Little Mermaid met the Sea Witch. She could not quite see her or make out her form, but the voice of the Sea Witch was low, cold, and indifferent. She knew why the Little Mermaid had come. A mermaid in search of a soul. That is quite a desire, my girl. Is it possible? Everything is possible, girl. But everything comes at a price. What do you want? I want nothing. It is more a question of what are you willing to sacrifice. I can give you legs. You will appear completely human. But because you are a mermaid, every step you take will be agony. In exchange for legs, you must sacrifice your voice. My voice? It is your greatest asset. Like I said, what are you willing to sacrifice? The Little Mermaid said nothing. The Sea Witch went on. And I know that you have fallen in love with a human. If you want a soul, this human must love you more than any other. For when humans love, part of their soul is transferred into their beloved. But if this boy loves another, you will turn to sea foam the dawn after his wedding. The Sea Witch was clear, brutal, and fair. The Little Mermaid saw no option. She wanted love. She wanted a soul. She accepted the deal. The Sea Witch took the Little Mermaid, cut out her tongue, and used it to brew a potion. The now mute girl took the concoction, swam up to the surface, and drank it. The Little Mermaid experienced greater pain than she ever had before, as she felt her tail split apart and transform into human legs. The pain made her lose consciousness. When the girl awoke, she was lying on something incredibly comfortable, soft and warm, and there, standing over her, was the prince. The mermaid thought she had died, but then again, she had no soul, so she must be alive. The prince said, "You're awake. We found you on the beach. Are you okay?" The girl could not answer, but nodded. "Can you speak?" She shook her head. "Well, you're safe now, and you can stay as long as you want." The prince thought the girl was the most beautiful he had ever seen in his life. Though she could not speak, she was expressive and a delight to be in the company of. The former mermaid was most excited to experience what she learned was called dancing. She found she was a natural at it, as all sea creatures have a profound sense of rhythm. The entire court longed to see the mysterious girl dance, totally unaware that she was in agonizing pain. It was as if two swords were constantly piercing through her legs. But the Little Mermaid hid the pain from everyone but herself. She loved the prince and hoped to win his love and his soul. The prince cared for the girl, but the tragedy was his heart belonged to the one who had rescued him from the shipwreck. He was convinced this was a girl who had come from a nearby temple, who had been there when he awoke on the beach. The prince was totally unaware his rescuer had been the Little Mermaid, and the Little Mermaid, in turn, could not explain this to him. But the girl was convinced that in time the prince would love her in return. But the societal pressures of monarchy do not care for love. The prince was expected to marry high and wealthy. He had a duty. A bride was selected for the prince, and he resisted the proposal, until it was revealed that the princess in question was the very girl from the temple who he thought had saved him. To him, this girl had saved his life, and now he had a duty to give that same life to her forever. The Little Mermaid was devastated. She was trapped. She could not tell the prince the truth. The wedding celebrations were organised, and every day the mermaid danced through the physical and now immense emotional pain. She knew her soulless death was imminent. The wedding was to be held on a newly built ship to replace the one that had sunk. The Little Mermaid was of course invited, but no one paid her any attention. The heartbroken girl stared out at the ocean and awaited her dissolution into sea foam. The wedding was today, her death at dawn tomorrow. But suddenly, out of the ocean, the Little Mermaid saw her 5 sisters. She nearly didn't recognize them because each of them had lost their hair. The eldest said, "Sister, we have traded our hair to the sea witch in exchange for this knife. If you kill the prince before dawn and spill his blood upon your feet, you will become a mermaid once more and can come home." "Do it, sister," said the middle child. "Humans are barbaric creatures, and they would do worse to you." The Little Mermaid took the knife, and that night she crept into the room of the sleeping prince and his new bride. Her heartbeat increased. Could she go through with this? Could she murder her beloved to save her own life? Is that something that someone with a soul would do? She gazed at the prince. He looked peaceful, happy, and he had been kind to her, saved her life, cared for her. The only thing he hadn't done was returned her love. She couldn't do it. The Little Mermaid took the knife and threw it back into the ocean, and she accepted her fate. She gazed at the horizon and her final sunrise. There truly was nothing so beautiful to her as the ball of fire that rose into the sky. The Little Mermaid breathed a final sigh and dissolved into foam, which spilled back into the sea. And then she woke up, in the sky, surrounded by beautiful flying creatures. One spoke to her. "Welcome, sister. Your refusal to murder an innocent has transformed you into a daughter of the air. You are of the spirit world now. Does this mean I have a soul? Not quite. But if you can do good for the world and for the humans, you can make them better, as good as they wish to be. Then you may one day earn a soul. How long will that take? That depends on you, sister, and on the humans whose lives you influence." It has been several centuries since the Little Mermaid became a daughter of the air, and she still continues her pursuit of a soul and to inspire good in mankind. The end. And that is the tale of the Little Mermaid, and it takes it out of you. It was an emotional story to adapt, and certainly an emotional story to read there. Because, of course, a crucial difference, if you are only familiar with either Disney adaptation of this movie, is, Little Mermaid, it very much saved, like, American animation. It's no exaggeration to say that, that especially with Alan Menken and Howard Ashman's score, and it was just as Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg had taken over at Disney, and like before The Little Mermaid, there was plans to halt Disney animation and just focus on the parks, and The Little Mermaid very much saved that from happening and began the Disney Renaissance. But of course, The Little Mermaid is now associated as a movie with a lot of critiques of the Walt Disney Company, and the Little Mermaid in question is like, oh, it was a lot of the bad faith criticism of the early 2000s, such as, oh, she gives up her voice and gives up her agency and all. And whereas Ariel in that movie is definitely one of the most active and has one of the most agencies of any Disney hero, male or female. But of course, there is the main thrust in the Disney film is she has this fascination with the world above anyway. You know, she has her little man cave full of all the little trinkets and everything. And then she meets Eric and he becomes the manifestation of this and the want of love. And it follows a very similar story, except for the fact that in the Anderson version, the Sea Witch is more of an obstacle rather than an antagonist. It's similar to the Snow Queen, which we'll be doing next week, in that the Sea Witch is actually very fair. She does everything she says. There's no ulterior motive, unlike Ursula, who wants to overthrow the Sea King and rule power and gives you this third act Power Rangers finale. But of course, the main difference, and this ends up totally changing the trajectory of the story, is that the Little Mermaid doesn't just want to be human and doesn't just want to be in love. She wants to be immortal. She wants a soul. And yes, you can say that she only wants the soul so that she can live as long as this beloved does. And maybe this is the ultimate want of to be human, despite mermaids living for 300 years. But that seems far more the crux, and certainly the ending, with her becoming a part of this spirit world and going into this essentially indentured servitude to earn a soul at the end, really seems that that is where the focus is, not on love. And this idea of the knife, that she has the opportunity to kill the prince and restore her mermaidhood, really drives the idea of is that what it is to be human, to show mercy, and is that what it is to have a soul? That was certainly my reading of it. And another core factor, of course, was Louise O'Neill, the great Irish writer. She did an adaptation of The Little Mermaid maybe about 10 years ago. And I remember when that was out and a lot of people were reading it, there was a lot of focus on the agony that the mermaid is in when she is in human form, which is, of course, there in the Anderson version. I think some people thought that that was an addition. Now, I think Louise O'Neill really expanded upon that in a more kind of clearly feminist viewing lens of the piece. But that is very much in the Anderson, that there is this, that it is unnatural, that it is against the laws of the ocean and land for a mermaid to become human. And so that it is like these daggers stabbing into you constantly to walk on human legs. And of course, in the very kind of grim tale-esque, because she doesn't just lose her voice, but her tongue is physically cut out. But this, like a lot of Anderson stories, you can see very clearly why this all still resonates, and why that kind of the simplicity and broad strokes of folk and fairy tales and myths, why they still resonate. This is such a prime example of that, because especially in conversations today, this is such a story of explorations of self-identity and trying to become true to yourself and changing for others. And these are conversations we are having now more than ever on both sides, and has produced so much good and so much venom. And just, this is one of the great conversations of our modern age. And Hans Christian Andersen was talking about this, 150 years ago, as writers before him were as well, such as Shakespeare. But with Andersen's tales, it's very hard not to, because he had quite a difficult life himself, certainly when it came to love. There's a lot of differing opinions on Andersen's sexuality. He had relationships with women, with men. Some thought that perhaps he was asexual. He famously fell in love with Jenny Lind, the famous Swedish opera singer known as the Swedish Nightingale. the character who sings Never Enough for any Greatest Showman viewers out there. And he just viewed her as a little brother and rejected his advance, and supposedly she was the inspiration for the Snow Queen, so there was always, like any writer, I think, but particularly Anderson, put a lot of himself and of his own tragedy into his work. And a lot of the changes, that were made for the Disney version, you can, of course, understand to a degree, because, like, anything that was taken out were the more brutal elements and certainly the more existential questions. So there's no soul, there's no agonizing pain, there's no physically tongue being cut out or anything. But then again, this story was written for children in the first place, and it just goes back to the constant theme of seeing how children's stories have become increasingly sanitized and more wrapped up in cotton wool and just become simpler and in some cases dumber and not as respectful of a child. But there's so much that you could talk about with this, but like with the greatest stories, I really think this is a story that just speaks for itself, and any of my opinions on it, I feel they just take away then from potentially your own. This is one of those ones you'd want to just read to everyone and see what different people read in it. But certainly my overriding feeling from writing it is just this pathos in it. My favourite thing in the writing of it certainly was attempting to be in the Little Mermaid's head as she was viewing everything. So, like, if you didn't know what a ship looked like, or what clothes were, what dancing was, what the sky was, what the sun was, what a bed is, that as a writer was really, really interesting to kind of explore. And those are the kind of things that really put you in, or at least attempt to put yourself in the headspace of it. And that, from an exercise point of view, was really interesting. But then ended up, I kind of feel this lump in my chest even now thinking about it. And I'm really, really happy I saw it. I did it, and I hope you are too. And it did kind of inspire me to do a couple more Anderson tales as well, especially around Christmas, which is why this was a little bit delayed. I've written, so I'll be doing the Snow Queen next week, which I've written the episode for as well, because these are two, unlike a lot of the stories I do, these are almost like novella-length stories, so they need a lot of distillation while trying to still preserve all the core elements and then ideally bringing my own flavour to it. But they felt like good. I wanted to do both of these stories, and I'm going to do the Red Shoes as well, because they all just seem, there's something quite Christmassy about them, particularly of the Snow Queen with its winter setting. And just there's something very Christmassy about Denmark in general, isn't there? So please follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com for any thoughts, queries, questions, suggestions, all of that. Join Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com. Buy my book, Garden Sea and Neo Myth of Home. Next week we'll have the Snow Queen just before Christmas. Until then, I'll see you all, you'll heal me all. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Headstuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.